Ethan Ward had never imagined that fate would send him so far away from the dusty fields of his hometown. He used to believe his life would stay simple. A boy from a small place with no greater destiny than working, eating, laughing, and watching the stars from the back of an old truck. But then wars came, and treaties needed men who understood both courage and patience. It was not his plan, but now he was on a ship gliding through space, following orders that felt far larger than he was. The halls of the ship were wide but cold, lined with bright lights that hummed softly. The crew moved with purpose, each face set and determined. Ethan carried himself carefully, trying to keep his feelings hidden. He was only assigned to be part of the diplomatic guard, nothing more. His main role was to support, to translate customs, to make sure the different groups understood each other without falling into arguments. He never planned to stand out, but his eyes made sure he noticed more than he wished. Because there was someone on board who could not be ignored. Princess Lillian. The first time Ethan saw her was during the welcome ceremony in the great hall of the station. She wore a gown of silver white that shimmered under the lights, yet it was not her clothes that drew him in. It was her presence. She carried herself with strength, yet with a softness that made people lower their voices when she passed. She did not need guards to command respect. Her voice alone was enough. Ethan told himself she was far beyond his reach. Princess born of high rank, tied to endless traditions and promises he could not possibly understand. And he, in comparison, was only a soldier from Nevada who happened to know a few languages and codes. He kept his distance, showing her respect as an officer should, trying to be invisible rather than noticed. But the human heart has little discipline, even when the mind commands silence. Time and again, Ethan found his gaze wandering toward her as she spoke with her counsel. He noticed the calm way she handled disputes, the way she leaned forward to listen before giving judgment. It was not just beauty that kept him watching, it was her strength, her kindness, and the way she seemed to bear the weight of entire worlds without losing her resolve. At night, as the ship drifted beyond the stars, Ethan would sit by the wide window of the lower deck. He watched the endless scatter of light above black space and thought of the huge gap between them. He convinced himself that his place was to serve, to help, and then quietly step away once his assignment was over. That was the way of people like him. The princess would one day be promised to a noble house, someone fit for rule, someone who could match her crown, not to a soldier with no title. Yet the more he tried to lock his heart, the harder it pressed. Every word she spoke stayed with him. Every smile haunted him. He remembered a time on the ship corridors when she walked past him and their eyes met. It was brief, so brief he told himself later that perhaps she had not even noticed. But for him, it was enough to keep him awake that night. The crew often whispered her name with admiration, but Ethan's thoughts went further, into places he dared not share. He told no one, not even his closest friend, about the wishes that rose inside him when he thought of her. He guarded them closely, because how foolish would it sound for a man in his position to admit them out loud. Still, in the quiet of the decks, he allowed the words to pass his lips in a whisper, too soft for anyone else to hear. "I wish I had the opportunity to marry her," he murmured one night, and then he laughed at himself, shaking his head. It was a dream wrapped in a dream, a distant star that could never be reached. He believed no one had heard him, that the walls and engines had swallowed his secret. But fate has a way of listening, even to the quietest voices. Princess Lillian was near, not far from the railing where he stood. He had not realized she had entered the observatory deck, walking lightly with no escort. She had paused, her eyes on the same sea of stars. And when his whisper reached her, she turned. Ethan did not see her at first. He kept staring forward, red rising in his face for speaking his thoughts aloud. Then he felt the weight of her gaze and spun around. And there she was. Her eyes were on him, warm and steady, full of something he could not yet name. Their worlds were still divided, but in that moment, the distance between them had begun to break. The war reached them before anyone was ready. The first alarms echoed through the long metal halls, sharp and cold, shaking both soldiers and officers to action. Lights flashed red, and voices shouted over one another as the ship prepared for battle. Ethan ran to his post with his heart heavy, knowing the journey of peace had just been torn apart by fire. Princess Lillian was still in the command chamber, standing at the front, while her council argued. Some insisted they retreat for safety, while others begged her to accept the shields of nearby strongholds. Yet her voice rose above them, calm and steady. She declared that she would not hide while her people suffered. She would stay, she would lead, and she would not stand apart from the fight. Her words silenced the room, filling it with a strange mix of fear and pride. Ethan found himself pulled closer to her side as the days of conflict began. He was ordered to escort her between meetings, to watch over her movement, and to translate when rival commanders came forward with demands. Many considered it a task of duty, but to him, each hour brought a new test of strength. Though the war shook the skies outside, he fought mostly with his own heart, which betrayed him every moment she turned toward him. More than once her eyes searched his face after a battle report. More than once she walked beside him in silence when the halls emptied. She never spoke about what she had heard that night. The whisper he had believed was his secret, but he sensed it stayed with her. There was a light when her gaze rested on him that had not been there before. Still, the storms did not rest. Outposts fell one after another, and rumors of betrayal spread like wildfire. Ethan stood guard through nights without sleep, patrolling and waiting while the ship drifted from station to station. He carried messages through ruined decks, watched fires rage across the black skies, saw friends lost in the silence of broken ships. Yet through all of it, Princess Lillian remained unbroken. Her gown of ceremony had long been traded for a commander's coat, and her voice grew only stronger. There came a night when the ship was surrounded. Enemy vessels closed in, and every fighter was pushed to the edge. Alarms rang, walls shook, and desperate orders filled the air. Ethan was at her side, guiding her toward the inner chamber as blasts rattled the doors. Men and women rushed past, faces pale as they carried the wounded. Smoke hung in the air, mixed with sparks that hurried down from the ceiling. Ethan urged her to move faster, but she stopped by the entrance. Instead of stepping inside, she lifted her chin and ordered that the doors remain open. She wanted to see what her people faced. She wanted them to see her standing strong. No blast, no noise, no strike of fear moved her from that spot. She spoke not as a ruler protecting her crown, but as a woman who refused to turn away from her people's pain. Ethan felt danger press tightly toward them. The shields failed, and enemies broke through the outer gates. In that chaos, he stayed in front of her, not thinking of orders, not thinking of his own life. When an explosion lit the hall, he threw himself forward, pushing her back as walls shook and debris scattered. His jacket burned at the edges, smoke rising where fire had licked too close. She pressed her hand to his shoulder, her eyes wide with relief. She whispered his name, but he only stood taller, his hand gripping hers as if that single touch could pull them both through the ruin. Later that night, when the fires were controlled and the ship managed to escape into the darkness of space, they found themselves alone in the observatory room that had once been filled with silence. They stood near the wide glass, watching the stars. For a long time, neither spoke. She finally broke the silence, her voice softer than he had ever heard. "I heard what you said," she told him. Ethan froze. His chest felt hollow, words failing him. He wanted to deny it, hide, make light of it. But her eyes left no place for escape. He forced the truth from his lips, rough and low. "Should not have said it. Forgive me. It was foolish." Her expression did not change. She took a breath, steady and clear, and then said the word that would change his life forever. The stars beyond them seemed brighter in that moment, glowing as if they had heard her promise. He looked at her in disbelief, his heart stumbling. But she only smiled, firm and calm, as though she had always known this would come to pass. The war around them had not ended. Fleets still burned, colonies still trembled, yet a new kind of strength rose deep inside Ethan as she spoke that word. For the first time, he felt not like a soldier lost in the storm, but like a man who belonged in with her at his side. He felt ready to face whatever would come. The word that Princess Lillian had spoken to Ethan still echoed in his heart. She had said yes. To him, it felt like a dream that had stepped into waking life. He carried it with him as the battle roared on, and for the first time, he no longer felt like a lonely soldier. The war had not ended with their secret. It grew louder, spreading across system after system. The council continued to gather, their voices sharp with doubt and fear. But Princess Lillian spoke firmly, stronger than before. Some argued to give in to the pressure of rival factions. But Lillian faced them with unshaken resolve, insisting that unity was the only path forward. She said they needed to fight together, not as broken houses, but as one people. Ethan often stood behind her as she spoke, watching the way she carried herself. When their eyes met across a crowded room, a fire stirred inside him. He knew she gave him strength, just as he gave it to her in silence. The final test came when the largest fleet of enemy ships closed in on their borders. Messages flew back and forth, some giving news of victories, others telling of ruins. Everyone waited for the princess to decide where she would stand. She had the choice to retreat into safety, but instead she called all houses lords. Ethan entered the hall with her and saw hundreds of eyes fixed on her. Old rivalries burned between leaders who once fought each other even before this war. Lillian raised her hand and silence fell. Then she announced the decision that stunned them all. She said she would no longer be promised to nobles who only cared for wealth and crowns. Instead, she would marry the man who had stood with her, who had fought through the fire by her side, who had spoken words of love, not because of her title, but because of who she was as a person. Every corner of the chamber froze. Some voices shouted in shock, some muttered in anger, others gasped in disbelief. Their eyes turned to Ethan, who could hardly breathe. He felt his knees weaken, yet Lillian did not waver. She spoke clearly that her choice was final. Ethan's hands trembled, but then he looked into her eyes. He saw no fear there, no shame, only certainty. And in that moment, he understood the truth. Humanity's strength was not only in weapons, not only in knowledge, but in the courage to choose the heart, even when the world trembled around them. The great hall erupted in debate, but in the end, something changed. The lords and commanders who had been ready to give up now looked at each other with uneasy respect. If she could cast aside every title and every chain of tradition for what was real, then maybe unity was not only possible but necessary. From that day, the war began to turn. The houses worked together. Everywhere the story spread, the princess had chosen love, and in that love she had united the broken. When the war finally ended, it was not marked by a grand blast or a single battle, but by treaties signed with steady hands. And at the heart of it stood Princess Lillian and Ethan Ward. Their wedding was held in the hall where she had once spoken of love before doubtful rulers. She walked toward him not in a gown heavy with jewels, but in simple white, her smile brighter than any crown. Ethan waited in a suit that carried no markings of a soldier, only the calm pride of a man who belonged at her side. When the vows were spoken, it was not as princess and subject, not as leader and guard. It was simply as two hearts that had chosen each other against all odds. From that moment on, the story of their love was told across the stars. Children would hear it as a tale of courage, not only of battle but of choosing what was true. And Ethan, once only a soldier who doubted his place, now stood beside the woman who had seen him and answered him with a single word that had changed everything forever. Yes.